Hi, AP World History students. This is Mrs. Hubert, and I just want to talk to you about Chapter 24 and the topic of imperialism and the building of empires. So this is the second key idea of Era 5, and this addresses of many political changes that are going on. We've just covered the economic changes, and so we're going to go over to the political side. And one word that we haven't talked about actually is nationalism. And I just want you to understand that we will talk about intensification of this feeling. And nationalism is an intense feeling of pride and loyalty to one's nation group. And that usually means people of similar language or culture or ethnicity. One thing that gets a little bit confusing is how to spell these two words. I just want to address this with you. So imperialism is spelled with an I, but the empire itself is spelled with an E. What is the difference between the two? Well, imperialism is a practice or a verb, and it's the policy of extending the rule or authority of an empire or nation over foreign countries or acquiring land and colonies. And it's basically the practice of controlling territory that's not your own. An empire, however, is just a noun. That is all of your holdings that you would have as a core nation. And so chapter 24 that we'll be exploring is, it does touch on industrialization, but the purpose, we've already covered that point. So we are going to talk about imperialism and establishing a European global order, which is a term you need to understand. I think it just makes sense, right? We're talking about Europe is coming to a position of dominance over all global systems during this time period, and they are basically able to establish new rules of competition and dominate other regions. We are going to talk about what is driving this process of imperialism, because in today's world, this topic is pretty controversial because we don't really have the same mindset and the same philosophies. Like, why would one nation think that it is okay to take over the land and property and people of another nation? Like, in today's political world, that whole notion would just be rejected outright. But back in the day, this is the most widely held belief among dominant nations, and so that is why we are exploring that. So we're going to get into the motives of exploration, and I have a little memorization device. So we're talking about causal factors. One is economic, and this relates directly to industrialization. If you need raw natural resources in order to produce those goods in your factories, you've got to go get the raw natural resources. And especially if we're talking about these European nations, they are, they're fairly small in size, and so they're going to need to go elsewhere to get these vital ingredients. So they need to go get colonies and engage in imperialism to get raw natural resources. They're probably seeking out things that are unique and high demand, or possibly things that are they lack. Another motivation is militarism and the rise of military power. And what we'll see during this time period is an increased focus on the building of your military. And that doesn't mean just people and recruiting people. It also means a continual investment in the development of new weapon technology, production of arms and weapons. And if you think about it, we are making weapons now in the industrial age, so we're making them in mass quantities. And so you cannot have a strong military without being able to mass produce. And this will require a ton of resources to fuel this military machine, which is why they are seeking natural resources. And in some case, actually, like Great Britain, for example, they are actually, drafting indigenous or native people into their military system. The P in empire stands for political state building, and this speaks to the intense competition amongst European nations. And really, there's this view that it's a zero-sum game, and these empires are emerging at this time. Power is shifting, and so if you don't get in the game, you are going to lose. And so it's just intense. It's like Hunger Games competition for survival. So all of these nations in Europe that are rising in power, they are competing. They're competing over fixed resources. And so it is just incredibly competitive. If you don't get in the game of empire building, so let's just say at this time you might have had like a more forward-thinking ruler that's like, we don't believe in this. The reality is that other countries are going to expand and dominate around you, and so it's going to lead to your decline. If you don't engage in this, it's inevitable, and this is just a historical truth. It's going to lead to your decline. So all nations that are growing in power, especially in Europe, are engaging in state building, which requires getting colonies. The I stands for new ideological beliefs. If we look at that word ideological, we just kind of see the word idea and the idea of social Darwinism. This is an important concept and term. You have to know what social Darwinism is. So Darwin, as we know, developed the theory of evolution in science, and this is referring to a biological process. And so what people are doing is they're taking this idea of a biological process and they're placing it on top of like political theory. And we have a quote here, like, so really it's a belief, like survival of the fittest is swayed in a way that's not true. And they're saying like, hey, clearly Europeans are superior because they have been winning the race of state building. Therefore, the Europeans are superior and have the right to do this. As I talked about, so Darwin is a leading thinker in the scientific community, proposing the idea of evolution and survival of the fittest, if you will. And this is people that apply this to political thinking and race, that this is not accurate with Darwin's theory, but as we know, that doesn't always matter, but it's taking hold among elites, especially in European culture. So it's the belief, social Darwinism is a belief that the European races, aka white people, European descent, are a superior race. This is proven by the fact that they are, quote, winning the race in state building, winning the race in economic development. Therefore, social Darwinism says that it is their duty to go out and to claim what is theirs, and then also viewing colonization as, quote, helping other people. So if you believe that European culture is superior, this would be referring to religion as well. It's your duty to take your European ways. And then it makes it also morally okay then to take your European ways and force them on other people. It also gives you justification for racist beliefs and viewing other people as inferior. There was a famous poem, we'll talk about this in class, about it's like, this is the title of it, and we have to understand we're talking about previous time periods so people don't use the same type of terminology, but white man's burden. And it was saying like, hey, look, like this is a difficult job. It's going to require loss of life. It's going to require monetary investment. It's going to require our attention and effort, but this is our burden to help these other people that need our help, and that like we have a duty to do this. And this was a major influential piece. We can think of times in history where a written work is influencing public opinion today. Twitter does the same thing. And so this poem that's published is like really shaping and influencing the thought and driving discussion, and people are adopting this point of view. R stands for religious motivation. This is assuming that Christianity is the one true faith and saying, hey, we have a duty then for Muslims, Buddhists, Hindus, people that aren't religious at all or maybe animistic, to spread Christian beliefs and to educate people about the Christian belief. And then E is probably a minor point at this point, but more exploratory, just really reaching lands that people haven't reached before, claiming land for the crown and growing the empire. So we still have an element of this exploration out there, although I would say it's probably last on the list of motivation. So this new era of imperialism, what we want to talk about then is we're transitioning away of, before it was just Europe kind of trying to assert its dominance, and now we're really settling in to this position of dominance. So in previous time periods, it was kind of just trying to control ports of trade and dominating trade routes, but we have this intensification of control, much more control than just controlling ports of trade and economics. And so we will see in this time period a transition away from kind of indirect manipulation and control to full on direct control of these colonies. Here's some questions that I want you to think about as we go through this. Make sure that you understand these concepts, that you can talk about what is imperialism. How is the wave of empire building different than the first wave after exploration? Who's out getting colonies? What's driving this? And then can you explain in your own world social Darwinism and white man's burden, those two concepts? And then could you identify that in writing? If you got a piece of writing, it was expressing these beliefs, could you be like, oh, like that is showing right there social Darwinism, and understanding how that's driving the justification for imperialism. This was a slide previously. I said make sure you can link these processes together. And again, just make sure that you understand the causal chain of events, how industrialization is fueling the desire for building of empires. And I'll give you a second just to take a look at this slide here as that process is explained. I think what's important to note is that initially there were a handful of powerful empires in Europe that were competing for these resources, but now more people are getting in the game. And so the competition is fueling up places that weren't industrialized or competitive before, such as Japan and Germany. Even the United States are now fully engaged in this process. So the rivalries and the tensions are growing. We will also be talking about mass unemployment and unrest, and also the growing gap in weapon technology between these nations. One of the consequences of imperialism is the subjugation. And so subjugation means, it's a verb, and it means to bring under control as a subject and to make submissive. So, unfortunately, we're going to see this is the intentional, that's what's kind of weird. It's like the intentional subjugation in every way of the people that are living in the colonies. So how do the European nations, how do they do this? What methods are used to bring people fully under their control? Remember, in a more direct way, not just manipulating trade and internal divisions, but literally, how does a small group of European colonizers take control of people and populations and force so much change among them? We'll see different types of rule and different ways of controlling. And these are just AP technical terms that you need to know. So a tropical dependency is a type of rule where you have a small number of Europeans that rule a large number of native people. These would be regions where people didn't die out, like indigenous population didn't die out, but the Europeans had to figure out how do we maintain control? So Java, India, Vietnam, these would be examples. Settlement colonies, this is where a small number of Europeans settle, but native populations are largely decimated by war or disease. And so these are just different types of rule and different types of colonies. With imperialism and division by race and impact socially, what I want you to know is that initially, this first wave of colonization, there's quite a bit of mixing. We saw this in Latin America, especially, where European men were marrying with local women or native women. However, after the European women start immigrating and these families become fully European, and after control shifts over, we see less and less mixing and commingling of cultures between the two. And there becomes more strict divisions within society and even physical segregation and separation. You will want to know elements of how Europeans did adopt local dress, housing styles, and architecture. This is true in tropical climates. You can't take a European Victorian house and put it in a tropical environment or get way hot. I'm going to pause. We'll pick up with part two.